Open your eyes in the morning. Before you check your phone, before you hear an alarm, before any notification pulls you back into the world, there is a single moment where you exist without time. You don't know if it's 5 in the morning or noon. You don't know what day it is. For one breath, you are completely untethered. And then something kicks in. Something old. Something you didn't choose. And you are awake. Most people assume the answer to this is simple. People just woke up with the sun. Roosters crowed. Life was noisy. But that's not quite right. And the real answer is far stranger than you'd expect. Because the question isn't how people heard something that woke them up. The question is how, for thousands of years, they woke up at precisely the right moment, without any device at all. And what that tells you about the machinery running silently inside your skull right now. Let's start with darkness. Because darkness is the reason any of this was possible, and also the reason it was dangerous. Your ancestors didn't live in a world with street lights bleeding through curtains. They didn't have the ambient glow of a charging cable, a router, a television on standby. When night came, it came completely. Somewhere around 70,000 years ago, in the caves and rock shelters of what is now South Africa, your ancestors would have experienced a darkness so total that you cannot replicate it today in any major city on Earth. Archaeologists excavating Blombos Cave on the South African coast found the earliest known use of ochre pigment, dated to roughly 75,000 BCE, suggesting structured rituals happening around fire. Fire was the entire horizon of light. And when it died, night was absolute. That darkness did something to the brain. In 1994, psychiatrist Thomas Ware at the National Institute of Mental Health in Bethesda, Maryland, ran an experiment that accidentally recovered a lost piece of human history. He placed volunteers in conditions of 14 hours of darkness per night for several weeks. He wanted to see what happened to sleep in pre-industrial light conditions. What happened was not what anyone expected. The volunteers didn't sleep 8 hours straight. They slept in 2 distinct phases, separated by 1 to 2 hours of quiet wakefulness in the middle of the night. Ware called this bimodal sleep. And historian Roger Ekirch at Virginia Tech spent 16 years combing through diaries, medical texts, court records, and literature from medieval Europe, publishing his findings in 2001. He found thousands of references to first sleep and second sleep, 2 separate sleep periods with a watchful interval in between, treated as entirely normal. That interval, that quiet hour in the middle of the night, wasn't wasted. People prayed. They talked to their partners. They checked on children. They interpreted their dreams, which medieval physicians believed were most prophetic in this liminal space. And crucially, they assessed the night. They listened. And here's what's fascinating. That listening was itself a form of timekeeping. But that's only half the story. In communities where the night had to be managed, where fire had to be kept alive, where animals could approach, where a baby could stop breathing, someone always had to know when it was time to wake the next person. And the tools they used reveal something extraordinary about how precision develops without technology. In ancient China, incense clocks were in use by at least the Tang dynasty, around 600 CE. A stick of incense or a coiled spiral of compressed aromatic powder would burn at a known rate. Specific scents were blended into sections of the coil so that a person waking in darkness could identify the time not by sight, but by smell. By 950 CE, Buddhist monasteries across China and Japan had integrated these scent-based clocks into their entire daily structure. When a certain fragrance reached the sleeping monk's chamber, it was time to rise for prayer. Your ancestors didn't need to see the clock. They breathed it. And honestly, what comes next is even stranger. Because in medieval Europe, the solution was human. It was a job. The knocker-up. In the industrial towns of England and Scotland, before alarm clocks were affordable, and even for some time after, men and women were paid to walk the streets before dawn and wake specific workers. They carried long poles, often tipped with wire or soft rubber, and tapped on upper-floor windows. They used pea shooters to blow dried peas against glass. They knocked in specific rhythmic codes so that the right person in the right building at the right floor woke up, and no one else. Mary Smith of Brindlefield in London was still working as a knocker-up in the 1930s, charging 6 pence a week per client. But here's what nobody talks about. Who woke the knocker-up? The answer, in almost every documented case, was their own body. And this is where something ancient re-enters the story. In 1999, neuroscientist Jan Born at the University of Lübeck in Germany ran an experiment that quietly changed the science of consciousness. He recruited volunteers and told half of them they would be woken at 6 in the morning. He told the other half they would be woken at 9. Both groups were actually woken at 6. But in the hour before 6, the group that expected to wake at 6 showed a dramatic spike in adrenocorticotropic hormone, a cortisol precursor that primes the body for alertness. Their brains had set an internal alarm. The other group had no such spike. Their bodies simply hadn't prepared. And it gets stranger. Bourne's findings suggested something that seemed almost absurd at first. The brain doesn't just record time during waking hours. It anticipates. It models the future. It begins preparing for a specific moment hours in advance. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If your brain is running a continuous anticipation engine in the background of sleep, modeling what will be needed when, then who exactly is asleep? Is the part of you that is monitoring, calculating, and setting biological countdowns ever truly unconscious? Or is something in you always awake, always watching, always running the clock that you consciously believe you've handed over to a device? The neuroscientist Till Renneberg at Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich spent 2 decades mapping what he calls chronotypes, the internal timing preferences wired into individual biology. His research, consolidated across studies in the 2000s and 2010s involving over 500,000 participants across Europe, showed that these preferences are not habits. They are heritable. Your inclination to wake early or late is encoded partially in your genes. Your ancestors didn't choose their relationship to morning. It was assigned. And the village, the tribe, the monastery, they built their social structure around that biological diversity. Early risers took first watch. Late chronotypes covered second sleep and the hours before dawn. The variation wasn't a problem to be solved. It was a system. There's one more piece. And it is the piece that doesn't leave you. In 1306, in the town of Beauvais in northern France, a cathedral clock was installed that struck the hours audibly across the surrounding area. It was one of the earliest mechanical public clocks in Europe. Within 2 generations, the civic records show a measurable shift in how people describe time in legal documents. Before the clock, time was relational, after the market bell, when the priest rang for vespers, at the second cock crow. After the clock, time became numerical and absolute. People began to fail to appear at appointments for the first time in recorded quantities. They began for the first time to be late. The clock didn't solve humanity's relationship with time. It created a new kind of failure that had never existed before. Before the mechanical clock, you could not be late. Time was not a fixed rail you either caught or missed. It was a texture, shared and negotiated. The knocker-up knew which worker needed 15 extra minutes. The incense clock filled a room with cedar before the monk's body was expected to stir. The body itself was consulted, calibrated, listened to. Your body still runs this system. Right now, while you sleep, your suprachiasmatic nucleus, a cluster of roughly 20,000 neurons sitting just above the optic chiasm in your hypothalamus, is counting. It has been counting since before you were born. It is the master clock of your biology and it has never in your entire life stopped running. It doesn't need light to function, though light resets it. It doesn't need sound. It doesn't need a phone face down on a nightstand. It has its own oscillation, its own rhythm, inherited from ancestors who lived and died by whether they woke before the predator reached the camp. Your morning alarm interrupts a process that was working. It doesn't initiate waking. It hijacks it. In most cases, your body was already preparing to surface. The cortisol was already rising. The body temperature was already climbing. The dream was already becoming shallower. The alarm catches you mid-ascent and drags you up the final distance, which is why it feels, some mornings, like being pulled through the floor of something you were almost done with. There is a specific finding from Renneberg's chronotype research that tends to stop people. In pre-industrial communities studied by anthropologists, communities without artificial light, without clocks, without alarm devices, the average sleep overlap between the earliest riser and the latest sleeper in a group was less than 1 hour. Which means the village was almost never fully asleep. Someone was always awake. Someone was always watching. Not because they were assigned to. Because their biology was assigned to. You are descended from the watcher. You carry the watch in your cells. We replaced all of it with a sound. A harsh, flat, electronic sound set by a number we chose before we knew how tired we'd be. And every morning when it goes off, there's a fraction of a second where your body registers something it hasn't fully named. Not annoyance. Not grogginess. Something older. A faint signal like a question asked in a language you no longer speak. The part of you that was already waking, already listening, already prepared, interrupted by a device that doesn't know you at all. Your ancestors woke by smell, by trust, by biology, by each other. You wake by a rectangle you hold in your hand. And the rectangle has no idea what it replaced.